Hello, we are back, and today we're going to talk about something that we have not talked about really at all, and that is early Japan, and from the foundations of it to the shoguns. Now, we don't know a lot about from early Japan because there is no writing really at all. It's not until they come into contact with the Chinese that it seems to be they adopt writing. The earliest society of Japan we call the Jomon. It's very, very old. You're looking at 10,000 years BCE plus, and I'll show you some interesting plus things in a moment. It seems like they were pretty advanced. You've got sophisticated pottery, as you see here. This is like a 6,000-year-old piece of pottery. Holds up pretty awesome. And on the right, you have this interesting dogu figure here. Now, I know before you get started, people are like, oh no, it's aliens, run. It really isn't. To me, if you think about it, I think it looks a little bit like the Venus figurine. If you kind of take a look, it's not too different, aside from like the extra suit out here. So let's ease up on the alien thing. What we do know, it seemed to be the development of the clan structure, which is going to be very, very important at this time. The clan and the family is going to really be what determines a lot of Chinese history, and it's going to be very similar to the dynasties that we see develop in China as well. It does look like a top-down structure. There looks to be that there was a fair amount of fighting, but again, we just don't know because we don't have the records. However, we have found some really cool stuff under the water. This is called the Yonaguni Monument, which is off the coast of Yonaguni in Japan on the island of Kyushu. As you can see, it's a very interesting terraced structure. When this was built, this would have had to have built at the earliest 8,000 BCE, if not earlier. Some estimates are around 3,000 BCE, but it really depends on the geologist that you look at. Now, there's an occasional geologist that refers to this as being a natural made object. I don't know if you could call it that way, but if you look at another angle here, you see it's absolutely gigantic. It seems that you have these cut terraces. So this is clearly done by a sophisticated civilization that gives us a situation in which we're looking at cultures that are much older than we once realized. Now, Japan really comes into our understanding around the year 346 or so, where you have the rise of the Yamato clan. And on the picture on the right, on the top, you see the symbol of the Yamato clan. And they are going to seize control of much of Japan by around the year 346. As you can see here, they control a number of the islands at this point, and their power will last until the year 794. They will establish an emperor structure, which they clearly get from China, and in order to substantiate that, they will say that they were defended from the gods, which of course I cannot, confirm nor deny. But it's specifically the goddess Amaterasu, who was the goddess of the sun, who we'll talk about later. Their capital was at the city of Nara, which is very beautiful, which I'll show pictures of. But really, at this time period, you have an influence from China. They're going to get writing from China. They are going to get the equal field system from China. They are going to modify Nara to make it look like Chang'an. You'll also get some Buddhism coming in here. But around this time, you also really have a lot of the complexities of Shinto, which is the main religion in Japan, which I'll talk about in the next movie, that develops during this time period. So it's really, really an important time for Japan. Here is just some pictures of Nara. Under Shinto, we're going to see the importance of nature, so just absolutely beautiful. Here are the hills surrounded by those just wonderful cherry trees, which is really one of the big symbols of Japan. And they have lots of friendly deer, so if you're okay with hanging out with a deer or two, go to Nara because they just walk around and you can just like totally hang out. The interesting thing is Japan today still has an emperor. Here's the Emperor Akihito, and the Yamato clan is the longest lived dynasty in history. Now, they always haven't had power. Actually, after 794, they won't have power again until the mid to late 1800s. But there have only been emperors from the Yamato family in Japan for the entirety of history. So you're looking at a clan that's going around about 1700 years or so, which is pretty impressive. Now, eventually, this is all going to change, and that is going to change with the influence of the Fujiwara period, in which becomes known as the Heian period from the year 794 to 1192. You have the growing influence of the, again, as I said, the Fujiwara clan, which basically married into the Yamato family and slowly but surely just took them over. It was actually very interesting that they basically create the emperor now as a ceremonial figure that's really just the focus of the religion, but the Fujiwara are the strength behind the throne. And they will still kind of keep everything from a top down structure, the emperor just, making the rules and things along that line. The biggest adoption here is really the codification of Japanese writing that will occur. And you see here, this is Japan and laugh and teacher. You should know this, there'll be a quiz. Love and prosperity. Perhaps the most important thing that actually came out of this pyramid was the development of the world's first novel, which was interestingly enough written by a woman. Her name was Murasaki Shikibu, and she wrote this story, The Tale of Genji, which is about the life and the tribulations of Genji, who was the son of an ancient Japanese emperor, and it's about politics and romance and war and life. Maybe wizards, not really, but I like Harry Potter, so it would have been cool. And there's just lots of different themes that we see that have really been developed over time, and just that structure, kind of beginning and middle end, which was crucial and has been very influential. And this is where it came from. So for those of you that like to read like me, this is where we get it from. Now, unfortunately for the Fujiwara, they eventually are going to get pushed out of power in 1192 by the Minamoto Japan and their famous leader Yoritomo Minamoto. And they will establish the idea of the shogunate because Minamoto takes the title of shogun. The emperor is still the emperor. We're just pushing him off to the side. We're not going to harm him in any way because it's not worth it to do that. He is simply the emperor. The problem that they ran into was that the area was just too big. The Minamoto clan, even though they could push out the Fujiwara, really didn't have enough power to run everything. So what they're going to set up is the idea of feudalism. And as you see in your notes, it's the same structure, guys. You have the shogun at the top, and he's going to give land to the daimyo, and the daimyo is going to lead, rule the land, for the emperor, give him military aid as well as taxes. And we all well know long term that this is going to result in them constantly fighting each other over and over again. And we know how that works. We talked about it in China. It's the worst type of government ever. We're going to talk about it again when we get back over to Europe, where it's the worst government ever. And unfortunately, Japan, it really prevented them from growing and becoming a power. The symbol on the right here is the Minamoto clan symbol. And as you can see here, these were the major daimyo by around the year 1600. And you can see, look at all these different families controlling these different areas. Of course, they would often fight with each other and fight to control. And here, one daimyo would say control this blue area, but then they would have the people underneath them. So then you would get these four guys. And so this guy could go to war with that guy, or this guy could go to war with this guy down here. And then they're just fighting each other, and it's just all chaos and death. However, their capital was at Kamakura, and it's absolutely gorgeous. It's actually well known for having the second largest statue of Buddha in the world. This is the Kamakura Buddha. Buddhism and Shinto, as you'll see, have a lot of things in common, so it's not surprising that Buddhism will be popular here. And this is the Minamoto Castle as well. However, the coolest thing that probably came out of this period was the development of the samurai. Now, the purpose of the samurai is these were soldiers that were basically educated from the age of 5 to defend the land. Most samurai, again, we always want to give them the samurai sword, which you see on the right, which are some of the best made swords. They could cut something as soft as silk. They were so hard. Basically, they were about 25 layers of steel pounded into one sword, and it could cut a man in half it could try to avoid it. But the big thing that they actually had was this bow. Look at this gigantic, like 6.5 foot bow that they would be able to fire accurately from the back of a horse. This was really their key weapon, and they were absolutely devastating with it. It was very difficult to become a um, samurai. Your training was very harsh. They would do physical things like lifting heavy objects. They would bathe in cold rivers to make them tough. And they really were dedicated to becoming these just finely honed weapons for the daimyo. Now, but what separated them was this idea of Bushido. Bushido was the code of honor that they had. And, you can pause the video and read these types of things: integrity, respect, heroic courage, honor, compassion, honesty and sincerity, and duty and loyalty. Duty and loyalty was loyalty to your master, loyalty to those that taught you, loyalty to the daimyo. You had to follow the honor, respect for life, respect for others. It was very tied in with Shinto. They lived modest lives, very deep appreciation for nature, and in many ways they policed themselves. Samurai, if they felt that they dishonored their family or their elders or did not do something well in battle, would basically be required to perform ritual suicide, which was known as seppuku or harikari, which was absolutely brutal because it wasn't like it was a swift death you had to suffer. What they would do is they would take a small knife and plunge it into their stomach and rip it across from left to right. They would then take it out, put it back in, and then rip a hole that was from the top to the bottom. This is incredibly painful, but it was a small knife, so not enough to actually get to an organ to kill you, because the idea was for you, if you just dishonored your family, you need to suffer. After suffering, a second man would then behead the samurai. But that's the idea, and you can see that dedication. And this is one of the indelible things of Japan. Japan is very big with honor and structure. The Japanese samurai have really influenced the society today. There's a big respect for Japan. There's a big respect for others. Jobs often offer their workers contracts for life, and most people actually never leave jobs because it's considerable dishonorable to the person that hired you. People often use samurai swords as gifts, but these disciplined men led to a disciplined society. If you look at Japan, they're an island that is successful in economics and education and science and technology, and a lot of it comes to these ideals of the Japanese samurai, that these men would be dedicated and they would be strong and they would be disciplined. Okay. And I think we can see that one of the big things that always jumps out at me when Japan got hit by that tsunami a couple years ago. Normally when we see natural disasters, you see crime or looting. Not one recorded instance of a crime or a theft or looting in that entire island. And that goes back to the samurai. So hopefully we learned a little bit something new about Japan today. We'll talk a lot about it tomorrow, and I'll see you guys then. Make sure you get your comments and your questions.